Reggie here, your fellow neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my recordings. In this recording, we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about the comic book market. And in some respects, this is actually a remastering of some content that I recorded about a year ago when I was originally talking about like the comic book market and comic book crashes and things like that. This topic is one that I think is starting to creep up again. And so I want to go back and kind of remaster what I talked about before, especially now in light of the fact that my audience has grown, but also because I've continued to mature in the hobby. I'm a couple of years into this thing now, and I feel more confident in some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. And so I want to remaster some of that original content with the hope that we can reach a broader group of people and to spark a thought, right? So a lot of what you're going to be hearing in the course of this recording is really some things for you to consider, some things to think about. Like most of my videos are designed to do that, to get you to think and not necessarily to tell you what to think. So to that point, I definitely will be looking forward to hearing your comments, your thoughts in the comment section, because I don't necessarily know if you're going to agree with everything that I'm going to say, and I think that that's perfectly fine, right? I think that on this channel we have developed for ourselves an environment in which we can have differences of opinion be shared in a civilized manner, and so we are going to continue that. We're going to take advantage of that because through a nice discussion, we all walk away with an improved understanding of another person's point of view. And so I'm saying this not for the people that have been here, but for those new folks that are coming in. You might not agree with me, but that's okay. It does not hurt my feelings. We can have a discussion and a debate, but we are going to do it in a civilized manner because that's how you get things done, at least in my mind, at least on this channel. So I'm not going to belabor the point anymore, but what I want to talk about here is I want to continue something that I've kind of sort of been touching on, which is this idea of a market crash, a market correction, and things like that. There are people that are talking about variants as if variants are essentially a harbinger of all things evil, right? The variant production is basically the harbinger of a market crash that is coming, right? And so I want to give you a couple of things to think about. I want you guys to maybe think a little bit differently, and so I'm going to be throwing some things out over the course of this recording that hopefully will do just that. So on the very first thing, there are some statements being made about the comic book market that I want to challenge. In my opinion, there are some nuances to the comic book market, the term, the comic book market, that I think are important. When you say comic book market, there is a belief by many people that the market is a singular thing. And I disagree. I don't think that the comic book market is a single thing. I think that the comic book market is comprised of sectors. It is not a single homogeneous thing. It is a thing that is comprised of sectors. And that's what I want to throw out to you. Here are my thoughts, that there are 4 sectors. And each one of those sectors moves at its own rhythm, its own pace. They are influenced by different things. They sometimes have individuals that operate within those sectors that don't operate in other sectors at all. Sometimes individuals can operate in 2 or 3 of those sectors. There are some nuances here that I think are important. And even within those sectors, I think that there are subcategories within those sectors that people can even drill down into. And I'm not going to talk about the subcategories within the sectors. I'll leave that to you guys. But here's what I want to throw out is that there are 4 sectors. And here are the 4. The first sector, new comics. New comics, new collected works. So this is like your graphic novels, your trade paperbacks, all your floppies, right? This sector is basically comprised of those things that are being printed right now by DC, Marvel, Top Cow, Valiant, Image, IDW, right? Boom Studios. These are the things that you go to the comic shop on Wednesday to pick up. These are the things that are sitting on the rack. These are the new, right? These are the things that are being produced right now. The second sector, the old stuff. This is the stuff that was printed and is now in a long box or a short box or in a storage facility or something like that. possibly even encapsulated already, right? So this is your older comics, your copper, your bronze, your silver, your golden age comics, but also the omnibuses that are no longer printed, right? Your older graphic novels that are no longer printed. This is the older stuff. This is the stuff that, you have to, like I said, go to a long box for, right? Or that you have to buy online because you can't find it in your local comic shop on the shelf because the local comic shop only deals in the new stuff. The third category, the third sector within the comic book market, original art. OA. OA is its own thing, and it moves at its own rhythm and its own pace, just like the two that I've already mentioned. The fourth and final category, toys, statues, collectibles. It is the catch-all bucket, right? So those are essentially the four sectors within the comic book market that I see. And it probably isn't even the comic book market, it's the comic market or something like that. But there are four sectors: the new, the old, the original art, the toys, statues, and collectibles. That is my thought. And definitely I am interested in what you guys think. Do you think that there are four sectors, or do you think that there are other sectors out there? But when I thought about it, I thought that those were the four buckets that things could fit into. And like I said, I think that there are levels below those things, but at the highest level, those were the four that I kind of see. So why do I talk about this? I talk about this in the same way that we would talk about the stock market. The stock market is not just one thing. The stock market has sectors. There's the tech sector, there's the energy sector, right? There are sectors within the stock market. And when you talk about the stock market, there are things that happen outside of the market, that happen in the world, that affect the market, but affect the sectors within the markets differently. Right? There are times when technology is not doing very well, and the tech sector will not be performing very well at all. But you could have other sectors like oil and energy, right, that are doing extremely well. Right? When you look at like the pharmaceutical sector, if you will, those sectors could be performing well, even though the tech sector is not doing well. There could be things that are happening in the world that will affect some, but not all of the sectors that are out there. And my belief is that the comic book market and sectors behave the same way. They behave the same way. So let's talk about it. Marvel, heaven forbid, goes out of business next week. Marvel is no longer in business. Something crazy happened over there at Marvel, and they are no longer in business. Which of the four sectors do you think is going to be impacted? Which of the sectors could be impacted if Marvel goes out of business next week? There could be an argument made that only one sector is truly affected, and it could be the first sector, the new comics and collected works. That could be the sector that is affected the most because Marvel has gone out of business. And of course, the downstream effect is that those comic shops that were basically only doing new comics would of course also be affected. But why? Why is that the case? That is the case because if Marvel is no longer there to pay the bills and to oversee the production of, new scripts and new artwork, and then to put that stuff into the publisher or the printer, and then to have it be distributed by Diamond, then there are no new comics and collected works, right? Those things go away. But what about the older comics? The older comics are still there. The older comics, I don't think, suddenly become worthless because Marvel has gone out of business. Original art. I don't know that original art suddenly becomes worthless because Marvel is no longer printing new comics. Now, original art sector could be affected because they're no longer getting an influx of new pages and new content, but those Ditko and Jack Kirby original art pieces that someone has in a portfolio somewhere suddenly don't become worth zero because Marvel is no longer producing new comics. In fact, you could make the argument that maybe original art becomes even more expensive as a result. There are folks out there that do original art that don't do anything else. There are people that love original art. That is their thing. They don't buy new comics. They don't buy old comics. They don't buy toys and statues, but they love some original art. If Marvel went out of business, I don't even know if those people would notice. And I'm exaggerating, but hopefully you get where I'm going, is that there are things that are happening out there that could happen out there that could affect one sector versus other sectors. There are things that could decimate a sector, but leave the other sectors either in a more favorable position or in a neutral position. Right? If Marvel goes out of business, yeah, there will be fewer toys and collectibles that are being produced, but what about the old stuff? I don't know if that old stuff suddenly becomes worthless at that point. You could make an argument that the value of those things actually go up. You could make that argument that actually will help. And I'm not saying I don't want anyone to think that I'm actually praying for some of this stuff to happen, because I love Marvel. I want Marvel to stay in business. I want every comic book publisher out there to stay in business and to continue doing what it is that they do. Right? But I'm trying to illustrate a point that there are things that happen out there that will affect some, but not all segments. Let's say that for some reason or another, Disney next week says we are no longer making any more movies. Marvel Studios has been shuttered. We are not making any more movies. Which of these sectors do you think could be impacted by a decision like that? Super extreme decision. But which of the sectors could be impacted by that? I mean, to some degree or another, new comics could be impacted. You could see a softening of sales, but I don't know that those comics and those local comic shops suddenly go out of business because Marvel is no longer making movies. You could see with older comics, you could see prices begin to flatten, and you could see a more normal market that comes about in terms of prices, right? A pre-10-year period with the Marvel movies. You could see a softening there, but I don't know that Amazing Fantasy 15, for example, or Showcase 22, I don't know if those comics are suddenly worth zero because Marvel is no longer making movies. You could see, again, some softening in the prices, but those comics are still there. Those comics are still desirable. Those comics are still attractive to collectors who want those books. I mean, let's be honest, not everyone that buys and reads comics even goes to see the movies. I don't see the movies until they come out, on Netflix or something like that, like a year or 2 years after. And I still buy comics, both new and old. And so again, it's important to recognize that there are things that are happening out there that could have some impact on some, but not all sectors. Let's say that the economy goes bad, right? That's a global thing, right? That's beyond comics. The economy goes bad. Which of the four sectors do you think is going to be impacted? You could make an argument that all four. You could honestly make an argument that all four sectors would be impacted. But that does not mean that all four sectors will collapse. It does not mean that Marvel and DC and Top Cow and Valiant and Image does not mean that they're going to go out of business. It does not mean that the comics that you have in your possession are suddenly going to be worth zero. It doesn't mean that. It just means that folks will have less disposable income, right? Less disposable income to buy comics on the eBay, or to buy comics on Instagram, or to buy comics on Facebook. But comics themselves, new comics, old comics, original art, toys, statue, collectibles, these things don't suddenly drop to zero, but you could see a softening in the prices for what people are asking. And is that a bad thing? I don't think so. I don't know that it's a bad thing. I mean, it's a bad thing if you overpay, right? But what we're talking about here are market corrections. These are market corrections, which is something that happens within any market, within sectors, within those markets. Market corrections they happen all the time, but that doesn't mean that it is a collapse, and it doesn't mean that things go back to zero. Several months ago, a subscriber and I actually partnered up to do a project in which we actually looked at some blue chip comics. And what we looked at, and I can't remember how many comics there were, maybe 10 or 11 or something like that. I'll try to find the link to this thing. But we basically looked at what happened to some blue chip comics over the course of 40 years. And 40 years is a long period of time, right? A lot of cycles that happen within markets. There's booms, there's busts, all that kind of stuff over the last 40 years. But what we found is that by and large, some of these blue chip comics actually did nothing but increase in value over the course of 40 years. I mean, some of them were pretty flat for like the first 10 years, but then after that, they kind of took off, and they took off even more with the various movies and all this other stuff that happened. My point is that there are comics out there, there are collectibles out there that will continue to perform like nobody's business. But the same way that there are those that will perform, there are also those that won't perform. There are those that won't do anything, but that is the case with most things, right? So the question becomes not necessarily if there will be a market correction, because market corrections always happen. The question becomes, how do you prepare for the market correction that will eventually come? And when it will come, who knows? No one knows that. But the question is, again, what are you going to do to prepare for that market correction when it comes? And some people would say, you know, I know that markets are a cyclical thing. But and people will also say that golden and silver age and bronze age books and things like that, those books tend to do well. They tend to hold their value long term. And so a lot of people will buy modern comics and variants and things like that, and they will use those comics to actually fuel the purchase and the acquisition of other books that will potentially stand the test of time. And again, this is one of those things where it pays to do your research. By going out there and doing your research, then you might actually be in a better position to take advantage of market corrections that are going to happen. The other part that I should probably mention is that, you know, even if you are buying a collection, and let's say that the values collapse, the values go away. Why did you buy the comic? Did you buy the comic because you wanted to enjoy the comic for what it is, that it's your favorite character, your favorite team, you always wanted to own this book, or were you buying it for the purpose of just future value? Ideally, you want to have a combination too, right? You want to have a combination of a book that goes up in value, but also one that you really enjoy, right? And so even if things go south, if you had a book in your possession, in your collection that you really enjoyed, at least you were able to get that out of it. But the other part is this. Markets are cyclical. Yeah. So it goes down, but with time, it will also come up. So unless you have to sell the book, then you don't have to realize that negative impact, especially if you can hold on to that book. Housing prices, house boom. There was a boom, there was a bust. Houses were like super cheap, right, for a certain period of time. But what's happened now is that houses are pretty expensive now again. The fundamentals of the housing market are much better now than they were the last time around. But if you could ride that wave from the boom to the bust, you're sitting in a pretty good place, right? So comics are, in my mind, very similar to other markets. You just have to pay attention to what's happening in those markets. Pay attention to the similarities that actually exist with our market and figure out how to ride the wave. And I would say, there are people that have been in this hobby for decades, and those people can probably speak to this much better than I. And hopefully those folks like, Chaos Lord and Just Pele, I'm hoping that some of these guys will actually make some comments in the comment section, because they have a tremendous amount of knowledge. And if I didn't mention your name, forgive me for that. You too have a tremendous amount of knowledge. But I definitely want to encourage folks that have this expertise, that have been in the hobby for 10, 20, 30, 40, because there are people out there. I want to encourage you guys to put those comments in the section and kind of let people know what your thoughts are. And even if you disagree with me, that's cool too. I am not too prideful to admit if I got something wrong, but hopefully there was more right than wrong in this recording. So with that, I'm going to wrap this thing up. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, I definitely want to encourage you to give a thumbs up on the video. If you have comments, I definitely want to encourage you to drop those comments in the comment section. If you are listening to this on one of the podcasting services, head over to YouTube. Check me out, Regie Collects on YouTube, where we can mix it up over there a little bit more. If you guys need to reach out to me, feel free to do so at Regie Collects on Instagram. That is REGIE Collects on Instagram. Take care.